Bozeman, Montana wasn't the kind of place that drew attention. In the winter, a quiet layer of snow blanketed the earth, muffling sounds and softening everything except the cold. But on that Saturday, the local livestock barn buzzed with an unusual energy. Uh, the town was holding its first animal adoption event in years, and people gathered, drawn by curiosity, kindness, or maybe just the promise of coffee and cookies provided by the women's club. The barn, usually echoing with the lowing of cattle and bleating of sheep, was alive with the yips, barks, and whimpers of dogs of every shape and size. The cages lined the barn's east wall, each decorated with a hopeful sign: "Adopt me," or "Looking for a family." Most dogs pressed forward, tails wagging, eyes bright. Children darted from cage to cage, laughing, pointing, asking if the Haan Bielide could take home the brown one, Gwynnis, the spotted one, the little one that stood on two legs and begged. But at the very end, away from the rest, was a cage different from all the others. Its occupant, a grizzled, scarred German shepherd, lay in the shadow, eyes dark and unreadable. The paper on his crate read, in thick black marker, "Dangerous. Do not touch." Someone had added, almost as an afterthought, "Unadoptable." People didn't linger there. Even the most boisterous kids pulled back, urged on by cautious parents. Volunteers spoke in hushed tones when they passed. "That one?" a tall man asked a shelter worker. She shook her head. "Been here the longest. Never lets anyone close. Don't even try." Grace Whitaker, all of 10 years old and barely tall enough to see into some of the cages, trailed behind her mother, Renee. Her mittens were frayed, and her boots, once purple, were a muddy gray, but her eyes were wide and bright beneath a mop of dark hair. While her classmates buzzed about puppies and poodles, Grace drifted to the end of the line, almost as if something unseen pulled her. She stopped in front of the German shepherd. For a long moment, neither moved. The dog's ears flattened, tail stiff as a board. He watched her, wary, and Grace stood quietly, hands at her sides, not making a sound. Renee caught up, breathless from chasing her daughter. "Honey, let's look at the golden retrievers. You loved that video online, remember?" But Grace didn't answer. She just knelt down in the straw, pressing her mittened hand softly to the bars, not touching, just close. The German shepherd's nose twitched. He didn't growl, didn't bark, didn't shrink away. Volunteers noticed. One of them, a tired woman named Donna, walked over, brow furrowed. "Sweetie, this one's not safe. Let's let him be, okay?" Grace looked up, voice gentle but sure. "I'll take him." It wasn't a question. It was a statement, clear and ringing in the chilly air. The barn went oddly quiet for a moment, as if the whole place was listening. Donna blinked. "He's not really for adoption, honey. We just bring him to show, but nobody's ever—" "I want him," Grace said. She looked at her mother. "Please?" Renee shifted, obviously uncomfortable. Her eyes flicked from the battered dog to her daughter, to the shelter staff, and back again. "Grace, we don't even know if he's safe, sweetheart. Maybe he's here for a reason." "He's scared, not mean," Grace said, so quietly only Renee heard. "Can't you see?" A man nearby, hearing the commotion, shook his head. "Kid's gonna lose a finger." But Grace stayed, kneeling in the straw. The dog's eyes met hers, and something passed between them, an understanding that nobody else seemed to see. Renee sighed, worry and love fighting in her voice. "You really want this one, more than any other?" Grace nodded. "He's waiting. He just doesn't know it." Donna hesitated, her eyes searching the dog for any sign of aggression. The shepherd watched Grace with a wary stillness. After a long pause, Donna turned to Renee. "I'll have to bring out the paperwork. Well, you'll need to sign some special waivers, if you're really sure." People in the barn whispered, some in disbelief, some in concern, a few with something almost like hope. Grace waited as Donna disappeared into the back office. Renee knelt next to her daughter. "If we do this, we do it together. And if it's not safe?" Grace looked at her mother, resolve shining in her eyes. "It'll be okay. I promise." When Donna returned, she unlocked the cage, hands steady, but eyes sharp for any sign of trouble. The dog didn't move as the door swung open. Instead, he stared at Grace, muscles tense but not threatening. Grace didn't reach in. She just waited. Slowly, the shepherd stepped forward, his claws clicking on the straw-strewn concrete. He sniffed the air, uncertain, every muscle ready to bolt. Grace remained still, a tiny figure in a world of adults who didn't understand. The dog's nose brushed her mitten, then pulled back. He didn't snap, didn't growl. He just looked at her, as if asking a silent question. Donna nodded, finally, voice trembling. Well, I'll be. He's never done that before. Renee signed the forms, her signature shaky. Does he have a name? She asked. Donna shook her head. Nope. Just came in with scars, and no history. We called him the one nobody touched. Grace looked up at the shepherd. We'll find your name, she promised. As they left the barn, whispers followed them, along with a single question that nobody could quite answer. Why was Grace so sure? Why this dog, when every warning told her to walk away? Outside, the snow began falling again, thick and silent, erasing footprints almost as quickly as they appeared. Grace held the leash gently, not pulling, just letting the dog walk beside her. Renee watched them, fear in her heart, but also something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The German shepherd didn't know what to expect. Grace didn't either. But as they disappeared into the snowy Montana afternoon, a new story had already begun, one that nobody in Bozeman would forget. The ride home felt longer than usual, as if time had decided to stretch itself just for them. The truck rumbled over the icy Montana backroads, its heater battling the chill that seeped through every crack and crevice. Grace sat in the back seat with the German shepherd, her dog now, though her was still something she had to grow into. And so did he. The crate was lined with an old flannel blanket, and she kept her gloved hand close to the bars, but didn't push. Her mother, Renee, kept glancing nervously in the rearview mirror, her lips pursed so tight it looked like she'd forgotten how to smile. The snowy pines blurred past the window, endless and cold. The shepherd lay curled at the back of the crate, wary eyes never leaving Grace. Every so often, his ears flicked, catching the softest sound, a zipper pulled, a breath drawn in, the whump of snow falling from a heavy branch onto the cab roof. He flinched at each one, as if every noise meant danger. Grace watched him, heart heavy but hopeful. Their home was a log cabin tucked into the woods outside Bozeman, smoke curling from the chimney into the wide, gray sky. The porch sagged a little at the corners, but Grace thought it looked like a smile. She led the way inside, boots squeaking, jacket dragging snow. Renee trailed behind, still unsure. The shepherd paused on the threshold. His muscles coiled tight, head low. He sniffed the air, then stepped inside only when Grace did, as if her footsteps cleared a path. Renee directed them to the living room, where a wire crate waited, half filled with fresh towels and a pillow. The shepherd eyed it, then slunk inside, turning twice before sinking to the floor with a long, low sigh. That first hour, Grace tried words, gentle ones. "Welcome home," she said softly, kneeling outside the crate. The shepherd didn't lift his head. He pressed himself into the far corner, body tense as a drawn bow. His eyes flickered to every shadow, every movement, as if danger might spring from the smallest thing. When Renee took off her boots and set them by the door, the clunk made him jerk, nails scraping against metal. He didn't bark. He just made himself smaller. Renee's concern spilled out in a whisper, out of earshot from Grace. We'll give him a few days. If he doesn't settle, we'll call the shelter for your safety." Grace heard anyway. She didn't answer. She just pulled out her sketchbook, flipped to a blank page, and started drawing. Her way of explaining things words couldn't. As the day faded and the sky bruised purple, Grace sat on the floor, reading aloud from her favorite book, her voice soft and steady. The wolf pup hid in the cave, afraid of thunder, but a friend waited outside, patient and quiet, until fear faded and curiosity grew. She paused, glancing at the shepherd. He watched her through the bars, his breathing slow and cautious. When it was time for bed, Grace tucked a drawing into the edge of the crate, a pencil sketch of a dog curled beside a little girl beneath a pine tree. She whispered, "Good night. You're safe," then padded upstairs to her room. The next morning, snow fell thick and heavy, muffling the world. Grace hurried downstairs, still in her pajamas, to find the shepherd where she'd left him. A single paw rested on her drawing. He didn't eat when she set out food, just sniffed and retreated. When Renee opened the front door to bring in firewood, the shepherd darted to the back of the crate, trembling. The slam of boots against the mat made him shrink, as if bracing for something he couldn't explain. Grace tried not to crowd him. She left a trail of little things. A toy here, a treat there, another sketch propped on the crate. She read aloud every afternoon, letting her voice be a bridge. Sometimes she'd just sit quietly. The only sounds the crackle of the fire and the soft, uncertain breaths of the shepherd. Renee watched all of this with a mix of pride and dread. "He's so quiet," she murmured one evening after Grace had gone to bed. "It's like he doesn't know he's allowed to be here." She eyed the crate, worry never far from her face. That evening, as the wind howled around the cabin, Grace sat at the table with her sketchbook. She glanced at the shepherd, searching for a name. "He needs something strong," she told Renee, "but not scary. Something that fits him." Renee shrugged, half listening, busy making tea. "Maybe Lucky or Shadow. He does stick to the corners." Grace shook her head. She watched the way the shepherd moved, slow, deliberate, heavy. He didn't dart or leap like other dogs. He moved like something old and careful, his steps almost too quiet for a dog his size. Then, it hit her. "Diesel," she said suddenly, her eyes lighting up. "Like the old trucks at the farm. They're loud on the outside, but underneath, they just want to keep going." The shepherd blinked, as if hearing his name for the first time. "Diesel," Grace repeated, softer this time. "You move like an old truck. Quiet and heavy, but steady." She wrote the name on a slip of paper and taped it to the crate. From that moment, Diesel had a name. Still, the small steps mattered most. Diesel flinched at every sudden noise, the bang of firewood, the clang of a dropped pan. If anyone wore boots, he ducked into the back of the crate. Doorways made him freeze, muscles locked, eyes wide. Grace noticed it all, making mental notes, adapting. She stopped wearing her boots inside. She spoke softly, moved slowly, letting him know he could take all the time he needed. She never tried to pet him, never reached inside unless he was asleep. Instead, she let her drawings and stories do the talking, decorating his crate with scenes of snowy woods, warm fires, and the hope of gentle company. Days slipped by, marked by sketches on the fridge, each one a milestone. Diesel ate a treat today. Diesel watched me read. Diesel didn't hide when I wore socks. Grace's hope grew with every small victory, each moment Diesel chose to stay near, instead of fleeing. One night, as the snowstorm raged outside and the wind rattled the window panes, Diesel crept to the front of the crate. Grace, sitting nearby, felt the lightest brush of his nose against her knee. She froze, barely breathing. Diesel didn't run. He just lingered there, a silent question in his eyes. Grace didn't move. She just smiled, letting the moment last. In the quiet cabin, beneath the howl of the winter wind, something changed. Diesel wasn't just a shadow in the corner anymore. He was Grace's dog, and she was his person, even if the rest of the world didn't see it yet. Winter in Bozeman was relentless. It pressed down on the world, silencing the landscape with blankets of snow, frosting window panes, and transforming the woods into a wonderland and a fortress. For Grace, that fortress felt both safe and lonely. Most days, she spent hours curled up on the rug beside Diesel's crate, pencil in hand, sketchbook balanced on her knees. The fire's warmth crackled behind her, painting the walls with shifting gold. Diesel watched everything from his corner of the crate. He was still a shadow, never barking, never whining, but always vigilant. Eyes darting between Grace, Renee, and the outside world beyond the glass. The sounds of boots at the door or the clatter of a dropped pan would make him tense and retreat to the back. But as the days trickled by, small things started to change, quiet as the snowfall. It began with the mornings. Grace would wake before the sun, shuffle downstairs in her flannel pajamas, and find Diesel watching her. She no longer felt afraid of his gaze. Instead, she greeted him softly. "Good morning, Diesel." Sometimes he blinked in response, a little longer each day. She took that as a hello. When she drew, her favorite thing in the world, she started to leave the crate door open, just a crack. Diesel didn't bolt. He would peek his head out, sniffing the air, ears cocked to catch the distant song of chickadees outside. The first time he inched his nose past the crate, Grace didn't move. She let him choose his pace, kept her eyes on her sketchbook, her breath slow and steady. Every day brought tiny progress. Diesel learned that Grace's gentle voice meant peace. She read to him stories of wolves who found new homes, of lost animals who became heroes. Sometimes Diesel would creep a paw out of the crate, then two, then half his body, then retreat again. The process was slow, like watching ice melt on a January morning, but it was there. Grace started to track their journey, sketching the moments that mattered and posting them on the refrigerator. The drawings became a living record. Diesel with his nose in the open, Diesel sitting halfway out, Diesel lying with his head on his paws near the crate's edge. Underneath each, Grace wrote a note and the date. Diesel watched me draw. Diesel ate a treat from my hand. Diesel sniffed my slipper. One afternoon, while the sky outside was thick with snow and the wind sang its lonely tune, Diesel did something new. He crept from his crate, not in a panic, but with slow determination, and settled himself in the far corner of the room. Grace was lying on her belly with her sketchbook, humming softly. She saw Diesel out of the corner of her eye, but pretended not to notice, allowing him to feel in control. Renee, entering from the kitchen, nearly dropped her mug. "He's out," she whispered it, as if afraid to break the spell. "Yeah," Grace whispered back. "He's just looking." Diesel's ears twitched at their voices, but he didn't bolt. Instead, he watched, cautious but curious. The next day, he came even farther, circling the living room, sniffing every corner, his nose low, tail tense but not tucked. Each time someone moved too quickly or raised their voice, he'd retreat to his safe space. But he always came back, a little bolder each time. The turning point came one night as the wind howled and snow hammered the windows. Grace was sketching by the fire, lost in her drawing. She felt a presence beside her and looked down to see Diesel, standing close enough to touch. His tail flicked in uncertainty. Grace didn't reach out. She simply held her ground, heart thumping in her chest. Diesel stared at her, then at the fire, then back. Slowly, tentatively, he nudged her knee with his nose. The contact was light, a question more than a statement. Grace froze, barely breathing. She remembered the shelter worker's words, "Don't push, let him come to you." She smiled and whispered, "Hi, buddy." Diesel's body relaxed, just a fraction. He didn't flinch when Renee entered with a tray of tea. Instead, he stayed where he was, nose still pressed to Grace's knee. For a long, silent minute, they sat together, two lost souls finding common ground in the soft glow of the fire. After that night, Diesel started seeking Grace out. In the mornings, he'd wait for her at the bottom of the stairs, sitting quietly until she greeted him. He followed her from room to room, never close enough to touch, but never far away either. His footsteps echoed through the cabin. Soft, deliberate, steady. He avoided Renee at first, but even she noticed his growing curiosity. Grace's sketchbook became a diary of Diesel's transformation. She drew him sitting at her feet as she read, lying beside her chair as she worked on homework, peeking out the window at the falling snow. She taped each drawing to the fridge, creating a timeline of progress that made Renee shake her head in disbelief and pride. One day, Diesel surprised them both. Grace was curled in the armchair, reading aloud, her voice weaving through the story. Diesel hopped up beside her, gingerly, his body tense but determined. He settled beside her legs, letting out a long, contented sigh. Grace glanced down, her heart swelling. "You're doing great, Diesel." She didn't dare touch him, not yet, but she knew it was only a matter of time. At school, Grace's friends asked about her dangerous dog. She showed them her sketches, proof that patience could do more than fear ever could. Some kids didn't believe her. Others were curious, asking questions, wanting to know more. Grace didn't mind. She was proud of Diesel, proud of herself for seeing what others couldn't. Back at home, Grace and Diesel found their rhythm. She learned his triggers, loud noises, boots, slamming doors. She adjusted her world for him, turning down the volume, moving quietly, always announcing herself before entering a room. Diesel, in turn, learned to trust her, inch by inch, day by day. One evening, as Renee made dinner and the cabin filled with the scent of roasting chicken, Diesel padded over to Grace and placed his head gently on her lap. She froze, shocked by the gesture. Diesel looked up at her with soft eyes. No fear, just quiet hope. Grace stroked his head, finally, her touch light and careful. "It's okay, boy," she whispered. "You're home." That night, as the snow piled high outside and the fire burned low, Diesel curled at Grace's feet, no longer a shadow, but a companion. The connection between them was no longer just hope. It was real. A bond forged in silence, grown through patience, and captured forever in the sketches that lined the kitchen fridge. Grace drifted to sleep that night with Diesel beside her, both dreaming, perhaps for the first time, of futures filled with warmth, trust, and the promise of something better. Winter storms in Montana were a thing of legend. The snow could fall so thick you'd lose the road, right out from under you. But it wasn't just the snow that made people uneasy. It was the way storms seemed to sneak up, sudden and angry, wind rattling the old glass and thunder rumbling down from the mountains, shaking the ground itself. For Grace and her mother, winter storms meant drawing in clothes, lighting the wood stove, and filling the little cabin with the aroma of stew and baking bread. It meant stories told by lantern light and the warmth of blankets piled high. But for Diesel, storms were a reminder of something else, something much darker than either Grace nor Renee could see. The first sign came on a quiet Saturday. Renee was out in town picking up groceries, and Grace sat at the table sketching. Diesel stretched out in the patch of sunlight that slipped in under the heavy clouds. The morning felt peaceful, almost ordinary. Grace had gotten used to Diesel's presence, his quiet, steady breathing, the way he followed her with his eyes, always watchful but not afraid. She could even move around the house now without him darting away. Sometimes he'd even nudge her hand with his nose, as if asking for more stories. But then, out of nowhere, came the sharp, echoing crack of a car backfiring on the road below. The sound split the silence, loud and jarring. Grace barely registered it. She'd heard worse. But Diesel exploded from his resting spot. In a blur of fur and panic, he bolted across the living room, knocking over a lamp with a crash, and sending Grace's colored pencils scattering across the wooden floor. Grace's heart raced. She froze, not wanting to startle him more. Diesel's eyes were wild, body shaking. He pressed himself against the far wall, panting hard, scanning for danger that wasn't there. For a moment it looked as if he might try to escape, run through the window, claw through the door, anything to get away from the invisible threat. Grace didn't move. She remembered every page she'd read about traumatized animals, every word whispered by shelter volunteers. He's scared, not mean. She kept her voice calm, a soft murmur meant only for Diesel. "It's okay. It's over. I'm here." Diesel's eyes flicked toward her, uncertain. He looked at the open doorway, the stairs, the world outside, the places he might hide. Then, suddenly, as if making a desperate decision, he darted not away, but straight toward Grace. She braced herself, expecting him to leap past her. But instead, Diesel pressed himself into her side, his entire body shaking so hard she could feel it through her clothes. His nose burrowed into her arm, tail tucked tight, ears flat to his skull. Grace was stunned. He was seeking her, choosing her, in the moment of panic instead of running away. The realization hit her like a rush of warm air. She gently wrapped her arms around him, whispering over and over, "It's okay. You're safe. I've got you." They stayed like that for several minutes, Diesel trembling but slowly calming, his breathing growing less ragged. Grace didn't let go. She could feel his heart pounding through his ribs, but his muscles loosened little by little as the storm outside faded. The lamp lay shattered on the floor, colored pencils rolled under the couch. But Grace didn't care. Something more important had happened. When Diesel finally looked up at her, his eyes were different, still wary, but softer, searching her face for reassurance. Renee returned just after the worst of the storm had passed. She took in the mess, the broken lamp, and the way Grace and Diesel sat entwined on the living room floor. Worry flickered across her face. "What happened?" Grace looked up, her voice steady. "There was a loud noise. Diesel got scared." Renee crouched down, eyeing the dog with concern. "He didn't hurt you, did he?" "No," Grace replied. "He came to me. He wanted to be safe." Renee's expression softened, though the anxiety lingered. "Maybe he's starting to trust us." Grace nodded, feeling an unfamiliar surge of pride. She knew trust was fragile, easily broken, never given lightly. Diesel had chosen her, and she wouldn't let him down. That night, a real storm rolled in. Wind howling, branches scraping the roof, snow pelting the windows like thrown pebbles. Renee lit every lantern, just in case the power went out. Grace built a nest of blankets near the fire and coaxed Diesel over. He hesitated at first, but then, remembering what had happened that afternoon, he lay beside her, his head on her lap. The thunder boomed and rattled the glass, but Diesel didn't run. He pressed into Grace, eyes closed, trusting her to be his anchor. Renee watched them from the kitchen, her heart aching with both relief and worry. She'd never seen her daughter so determined, so patient. And she'd never seen a dog so broken try so hard to be brave. For the first time since Diesel had come home, he slept deeply that night, his breath warm on Grace's knee, his body uncurled and relaxed. Grace lay awake long after, her hand resting on his fur, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest. She knew it wasn't a miracle cure. There would be more storms, more setbacks, more days when fear would win. But tonight, Diesel had chosen her over his fear, and that was more than she dared to hope for. The next morning, the world outside was pure and white. Branches hung heavy with snow, and icicles glistened from the eaves. Grace found Diesel waiting at her bedroom door, tail thumping softly. He followed her downstairs, not just as a shadow, but as a companion. They ate breakfast together by the fire. Grace dropped a piece of toast on the floor, and Diesel didn't run. He trotted over and sniffed, then looked at her for permission. Grace laughed. "Go ahead, boy." He gobbled it up, then settled at her feet. When Renee came in, she couldn't help but smile at the sight. For the rest of the day, Diesel stuck close to Grace. Every time the wind rattled the cabin, he'd sidle up to her, pressing his side into her leg until the world felt safe again. Grace drew a new picture for the fridge. Diesel curled beside her during the storm, both of them surrounded by swirling snow. She titled it, "Brave Together." Diesel wasn't healed. He wasn't fixed. But he was learning that not every storm meant danger, and that sometimes safety could be found not by hiding, but by trusting someone who cared enough to wait out the thunder with him. And for Grace, that was everything. As the Montana winter carried on, the rhythms of the Whitaker household found a fragile balance. Every day, Diesel grew a little braver, venturing into new corners of the cabin, daring to nap in the sunbeams by the window, sometimes even wagging his tail when Grace read him funny passages from her books. For the first time since Diesel had come home, hope lingered in the air, subtle but real. But trust, Grace was learning, wasn't a straight road. Progress was measured in tiny steps, but fear could drag them back in a single heartbeat. It was a Wednesday, the kind where the sky hung gray and heavy, and snow threatened but never quite fell. Renee was home, finishing up work at the kitchen table. Grace had just finished her homework and was coloring at the coffee table. Diesel sprawled at her feet, his chin resting on her socked toes. Suddenly, the peace shattered. 3 sharp knocks rattled the door, a rapid, heavy pounding that sounded more like a warning than a greeting. Diesel's head jerked up, his ears shot forward, the hair along his spine rose, and he surged to his feet with a growl, a low, thunderous rumble that Grace had never heard before. Before anyone could react, Diesel sprang toward the door, barking, deep and raw, the sound vibrating through the floor. He threw himself against the wood, claws scrabbling, barking again and again, each sound louder and more desperate. Grace froze, heart pounding, crayon scattered in her lap. She had never seen Diesel like this, transformed by something ancient and wild. Renee rushed from the kitchen, eyes wide with fear. "Grace, get back!" Her voice was sharp, high with panic. Diesel's barking grew more frantic, louder than the storm, than anything Grace had ever heard in her life. He was guarding, every ounce of muscle and memory focused on the threat outside. On the other side of the door, a man's voice called, "Delivery for Whitaker." He sounded more startled than offended, but Diesel didn't know that. He clawed at the door, barking so fiercely that Renee reached for her phone, her hands trembling. Grace moved, slow and deliberate, her voice as steady as she could make it. "Diesel, it's okay. It's just a person." Diesel didn't hear her. He was lost in instinct, his body a shield, barking until his voice cracked. Renee's panic spilled over. "He's dangerous, Grace. We have to do something." She hesitated by the counter, torn between her daughter and the fear that had haunted her since they brought Diesel home. Grace took a breath. The room spun around her. Her mother's fear, Diesel's panic, the stranger's footsteps retreating outside. She remembered the shelter, the words on Diesel's cage. Dangerous. Do not touch. She remembered how everyone else saw him, a problem, a risk, but she also remembered his trembling after the storm, how he'd chosen her as his anchor. He wasn't trying to hurt anyone. He was protecting what he loved. In the chaos, Grace did the only thing she could. She knelt beside Diesel, close enough for him to see her face. She spoke, not loud or afraid, but calm, clear, and sure. "He's trying to protect, not hurt." The words cut through the air, sharp and clean. Diesel froze, mid-bark, ears swiveling back. He turned to look at Grace, panting, chest heaving. She met his gaze and nodded, her hands open and empty. Slowly, the wildness faded from Diesel's eyes. His body sank to the floor, and he pressed himself against Grace's legs, whining softly. The tension in the room melted, replaced by an aching quiet. Renee lowered her phone, her face pale, but her eyes searching. "Are you all right?" Grace nodded. She stroked Diesel's head, feeling the tremble beneath her palm. "He thought we were in danger. He wanted to keep us safe." Outside, the delivery truck's engine started and faded down the road. The only sound left in the house was Diesel's breathing and the ticking of the clock on the mantel. For a long time, nobody moved. Renee finally knelt next to Grace, wrapping her arms around both her daughter and Diesel. I was scared," she admitted quietly, her voice thick with relief and worry. "I didn't know what he'd do." Grace hugged her mother back, Diesel's fur warm against her cheek. "He chose not to hurt. He listened." After a while, Renee got up to check the door. Diesel watched, his body tense but no longer frantic. She opened it cautiously, retrieved the package from the porch, and shut the door with a gentle click. When she returned, she crouched in front of Diesel and looked him in the eye. For a moment she just stared, searching for the monster everyone had warned her about. But all she saw was a dog who'd learned, somehow, to care. Grace watched the two of them, hope blooming in her chest. She knew this was the turning point, the moment everything could have fallen apart but didn't. Diesel had chosen trust. He had listened to her voice, and for the first time, her mother had seen the dog that Grace always saw. That evening, Grace and Diesel curled up by the fire, exhaustion settling over them both. Renee made hot chocolate and sat with them, her hand resting gently on Diesel's back. The air felt lighter, as if the whole house had exhaled. When bedtime came, Diesel followed Grace upstairs, pausing only once at the top of the landing as if to make sure he was welcome. Grace opened her bedroom door wide, inviting him in. Diesel circled twice, then lay beside her bed, eyes half closed, no longer hiding. Before sleep, Grace added another drawing to the fridge. Diesel standing tall in front of the door, her and Renee safe behind him. She titled it Protector. Underneath, she wrote the date in a single sentence. He listens? The next day, Renee called the shelter, not to ask for help, but to give an update. He's changing, she said into the phone, her voice unsure but hopeful. He's still nervous, but he's not dangerous. Not to us. He's learning. The volunteer on the other end sounded surprised and pleased. Sometimes it just takes the right person, she said, or the right moment. Grace beamed when she heard. For the first time, she didn't feel alone in her belief. She could see it in her mother's eyes, in the way Diesel watched her, always waiting for her next word. Trust was still fragile, but it was growing, stronger, every day. Diesel had shown them who he was. Not a threat, not a monster, but a dog who wanted to belong, to protect, and above all, to be understood. And for Grace, that was all she'd ever wanted. The cold in Montana could make a person forget the shape of their own breath. By February, the snow was deep enough to swallow a child's boots, and the wind cut through the trees in icy ribbons. For Grace, winter meant long afternoons, bundled in sweaters, sketching Diesel as he dozed by the fire. The two of them, a soft rhythm against the harshness outside. Diesel was different now, braver, more present, still wary of loud noises and strangers, but loyal in a way that made Grace's chest ache with pride. One Saturday morning, snow started falling heavy and wet, swallowing the sound of town and forest alike. Renee left for work, cheeks pink with cold, promising to be back before dark. Grace bundled up for chores, layers of socks, a thick blue parka, red knit hat drooping over her ears. Diesel followed her from room to room, tail swaying with lazy confidence. The storm was just beginning, fat flakes spinning through the gray light. After lunch, the wind picked up, rattling the window panes. Diesel watched the door, nose twitching, ears sharp, unsettled by something only he could sense. Grace checked the weather online. Winter storm warning. She shrugged, not afraid. In Montana, you learned to live with the snow, and you learned to keep a shovel by the porch. They were playing in the yard when it happened. Grace had thrown a snowball that shattered against the old pine, Diesel leaping and barking, white dust puffing around him. For a moment, the world felt perfectly ordinary, two friends lost in a game. The cabin a warm promise just a few steps away. Then Diesel froze, body rigid, head tilted, nose to the wind. Grace called to him, but he ignored her, every muscle suddenly alert. His ears caught something in the storm, something far off, hidden under the howl of the wind. Without warning, Diesel bolted, darting past the edge of the yard, paws pounding through snowdrifts, vanishing into the white blur of the woods. "Diesel, come back!" Grace shouted, panic sharp and raw. She hesitated only a heartbeat before plunging after him, boots sinking, breath coming in desperate bursts. The snow was deeper here, the trees packed close, branches clawing at her coat. The wind stole her voice and her sense of direction. She slipped and stumbled, heart pounding, calling Diesel's name over and over. Fear grew with every step. She remembered stories, people lost in the woods, blizzards swallowing even the strongest, the way the cold could erase a person in minutes. Tears pricked her eyes, but she pressed on. Suddenly she heard barking, urgent, fierce, not the wild panic of before, but something focused and relentless. She followed the sound, lungs burning, boots slipping on ice hidden under the snow. The forest was strange in the storm, familiar trees transformed into looming shadows. She found Diesel standing rigid in a clearing, body low and tense, tail straight out. He was barking furiously at a mound in the snow, something half buried, unmoving. Grace's heart lurched, For a terrible second, she thought it might be an animal. But as she got closer, she saw a flash of plaid, the curl of a mittened hand, and a shock of gray hair dusted with snow. An old man lay crumpled, his breath shallow and ragged, lips tinged blue. Grace dropped to her knees, shaking. Sir, can you hear me? The man's eyes fluttered, unfocused. His words slurred. Help! Cold! Diesel whined, circling protectively, never letting his body drift more than a few inches from the man's. His fur was flecked with snow, muzzle pressed close, sharing his warmth. Grace's mind raced. She remembered her mother's, phone, tucked in her pocket for emergencies. Hands numb, she pulled it out, swiping with trembling fingers, praying for signal. Miraculously, a single bar flickered in the corner. She dialed 911, her voice shaking. We found a man in the woods. He's hurt. He's freezing. Please help. I don't know where we are, but my dog found him. The dispatcher kept her talking, voice calm and careful. Stay with him. Use anything you can to keep him warm. We have your GPS. Help is coming. Grace stripped off her scarf, wrapping it around the man's shoulders, then pulled off her hat and pressed it over his ears. She looked at Diesel, who was still pressed tight against the man's side, his body trembling, but not from fear this time, from determination. Stay with him, Diesel. Don't let him sleep. Diesel whined and licked the man's cheek, pawing gently at his chest. The man managed a weak smile, eyes drifting to Grace. Smart dog. Yeah. He is, Grace whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks and freezing as they fell. The weight felt endless. The storm grew fiercer, wind whipping through the trees, threatening to erase everything. Grace huddled close, hands buried under her arms, eyes fixed on Diesel, who refused to move from his post. He kept nudging the man, refusing to let him drift away. Every time the man's eyes started to close, Diesel barked, a sharp, urgent reminder to stay awake. At last, faintly through the storm, Grace heard voices and the distant whine of a snowmobile. Red jackets appeared among the trees. Rescuers, moving fast. They wrapped the man in blankets, checked his pulse, thanked Grace a dozen times, then glanced in awe at Diesel, who stood between the strangers and the man until Grace called him away. One of the rescuers crouched to her level. You saved his life, kid. And your dog, he's a hero. Grace hugged Diesel, burying her face in his fur. He panted, exhausted but proud, tail finally wagging. The man, now bundled tight and safe, squeezed Grace's hand before the medics loaded him onto the sled. Don't let go of that dog, young lady, he murmured. He's got an old soul. Grace promised she wouldn't. When they finally returned to the cabin, escorted by a rescue worker, Renee burst into tears, hugging Grace so tight she could barely breathe. Diesel hovered at her side, eyes searching, checking everyone, making sure his people were safe. The news spread quickly. A girl and her dog, a blizzard, a rescue. The sheriff came by to thank them personally. Diesel, who once hid from every boot and loud noise, sat at Grace's side as she told the story, his head high, no longer afraid. That night, as the storm tapered and the world outside softened to gentle hush, Grace curled up with Diesel by the fire. She stroked his fur, whispering her gratitude, her love, and her pride. For the first time, Diesel drifted to sleep with his head on her lap. No fear, only trust. On the fridge, Grace added a new drawing. Diesel standing protectively over the man in the snow, Grace calling for help, the storm swirling around them. She titled it, Hero in the Storm. Underneath, she wrote, Diesel saved a life. The world seemed a little brighter, the cold less sharp. Diesel had found his place. Not just in Grace's home, but in her heart and the hearts of everyone who heard his story. From that day on, nobody would ever call him unadoptable again. By Monday morning, the world outside their cabin was dazzling. 1,000 icicles sparkling in the rising sun, the trees crusted with fresh snow, and every set of animal tracks perfectly preserved. But inside, the Whitaker household was buzzing with an energy Grace had never felt before. The phone rang, doorbell rang, and rang. And then neighbors, friends, even strangers who'd read about the rescue online or heard about it at the diner. Diesel's story had spread faster than wildfire. The local news crew showed up before noon. Grace watched from the window as a reporter in a red scarf stomped her boots clean and adjusted her microphone, while a cameraman sat up by the porch. Renee straightened Grace's hair and whispered, "Just be yourself, honey. They want to hear what happened. They want to hear about Diesel." Grace wasn't sure she wanted all the attention. She liked quiet, the hush of falling snow, the silent conversations she shared with Diesel. She didn't know how to talk to cameras or crowds, but when she looked at Diesel, she saw the same nervousness mirrored in his eyes. His head low, tail uncertain, wary of strangers with booming voices and clattering gear. "It's okay," she told him, smoothing the fur behind his ears. "We're together." When the crew came inside, Diesel stuck close to Grace. At first, he flinched from the camera's lens and the reporter's laughter, but Grace stayed steady, and Diesel took his cues from her. The reporter knelt in front of them, her notepad balanced on her knee. "Can you tell us what happened out there, Grace?" Grace's cheeks flushed, but she nodded. She told him about the snow, how Diesel ran into the woods, how scared she was, and how Diesel found the old man, how he wouldn't leave him, how he barked and whined and nudged him awake until help came. The words tumbled out, slow at first, then quicker as she relived every heartbeat. "Diesel never gave up," she finished, glancing down at her dog. He saved a life." The reporter smiled. "That's an amazing story. He must be a very special dog." Grace nodded, feeling a swell of pride. Diesel's head rested on her knee, his eyes bright but wary. The cameraman panned in close, capturing the bond between them. After the interview, the news crew left, promising to air the story that night. Grace and Diesel curled up together on the couch, the house quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock. Renee came over, hugging them both. "You did great, sweetheart, both of you." Later that afternoon, as the snow melted from the eaves, the phone rang again. This time, it was the shelter. Grace recognized Donna's voice. The volunteer from the barn. Her tone was warm, excited, but edged with disbelief. "Grace, I saw you and Diesel on TV. The whole shelter's talking about it. We're so proud of you both." Grace smiled, feeling a strange mixture of shyness and happiness. "Diesel was the real hero. I just followed him." Donna laughed. "That's what makes a great team. We'd love it if you two would come back to the barn next week. Tell Diesel's story in person for our next adoption event. I think it would help a lot of people see what's possible for dogs like him." Renee overheard and took the phone. She hesitated, glancing at Grace. "Are you sure?" Grace gets nervous in front of crowds. "And Diesel? Well, he hasn't been back to the shelter since that day." But Grace surprised them both. "I want people to know what Diesel can do. Maybe they'll give other dogs a chance." It was settled. All week, Grace fretted. She worried about speaking in public, about Diesel panicking in the noisy barn, about everyone staring at them. But every time she thought about turning back, she pictured the sign on Diesel's old crate. Dangerous. Unadoptable. How many other dogs waited in fear, just needing a little time, a little trust? On the morning of the event, Renee packed a bag of Diesel's favorite treats, Grace's sketchbook, and a fresh drawing she'd made. Diesel standing tall in the snow, the rescued man's mittened hand on his fur, hope shining through a blizzard. Grace wore her best jeans and a soft green sweater, the one that made her feel brave. Diesel, sensing her nerves, stuck close at her side, tail low but wagging. When they pulled up to the barn, Grace's stomach fluttered. The parking lot was full, balloons bobbed by the doors, and a crowd of families milled inside, the air buzzing with laughter, barking, and anticipation. The barn was just as she remembered. The sharp scent of straw, the echo of footsteps, the hopeful eyes of every animal waiting. People recognized Diesel right away. Whispers chased them down the aisles. "That's the hero dog. That's the girl from TV." Some kids pointed wide-eyed, asking if they could pet him. Grace kept a gentle hand on Diesel's collar, reassuring him, whispering that everything was all right. Donna met them by the old pens, her smile so big it wrinkled her eyes. "Thank you for coming, Grace. We're all so excited. She handed Grace a microphone, which made her palms sweat. Diesel's leash trembled in her grip. When Donna called everyone together, the barn quieted. Grace stood in front of a small stage, her knees shaking, Diesel at her feet. She looked out at the crowd. Parents, kids, shelter workers, and rows of dogs in their crates, eyes shining with hope and fear. She swallowed her fear. The words came slow at first, but then she remembered Diesel cowering in his cage, remembered the moment he chose to trust her. She told her story, the storms, the slow steps, the first time Diesel pressed against her for safety, and the day he saved a stranger's life. At the end, her voice shook but didn't break. Diesel isn't fixed. He was never broken. He just needed time. For a long moment, the barn was silent. Then someone sniffled, another wiped their eyes. Donna blinked away tears. A little boy raised his hand and asked, "How can I help a dog like Diesel?" Grace smiled, relief flooding through her. "Just be patient. Give them a chance. That's all they really need." As people drifted forward, a few families asked about adopting older or difficult dogs. Grace watched, hope blooming in her chest. Diesel leaned into her side, eyes shining, no longer afraid. When it was over, Donna hugged them both. "You changed some minds today, Grace. You and Diesel." That evening, back home, Grace hung her latest drawing on the fridge. Diesel lay at her feet, his head heavy with exhaustion and pride. For the first time, Grace didn't feel invisible. Diesel was a hero, and so was she, for believing in him when no one else did. The bond between girl and dog was stronger than ever, and somewhere in the shelter, another lonely animal might just get a second chance, thanks to the story of the dog nobody touched, until someone finally did. Returning to the barn felt like stepping backward in time for Grace, except now the air hummed with possibility rather than dread. The old livestock barn in Bozeman was unchanged, weathered wood, the sharp tang of hay and dog shampoo, morning sun streaming through the slats. But for Grace and Diesel, everything was different. Last time, Grace was just a quiet girl in a crowd, and Diesel was the dog nobody wanted. Now their story was whispered from crate to crate, and hope sparkled in places where there'd only been shadows before. Renee parked by the fence, squeezing Grace's hand before they got out. "You ready?" she asked, voice gentle, eyes brimming with pride and a pinch of worry. Grace nodded, though her heart fluttered. Diesel sat in the back, nose pressed to the window, tail thumping when he saw Grace turn. She clipped his leash, opened the door, and let him out. The snow was softer now, hints of spring hidden beneath the crust, but the wind still carried the bite of winter. They walked up the gravel path, past families arriving with dogs on leads and bundled-up children skipping ahead. Diesel's ears flicked at every sound, but his steps were steady, tail low, but not tucked, gaze moving to Grace for reassurance. The barn doors loomed ahead, bigger somehow than she remembered. Inside, the scene was almost a mirror of that day months ago. Crates lined the walls, volunteers in bright vests bustled, voices and barks rising in a familiar chorus. But this time, people turned as Grace and Diesel entered. Smiles, waves, nods of recognition rippled through the crowd. Donna, the volunteer with the kind eyes, hurried over. "Grace, Diesel, you made it." She crouched, offering her hand. Diesel sniffed, then licked Donna's fingers, earning a laugh. "Look at you." "Hard to believe you're the same dog." Grace smiled, nerves crackling under her skin. She scanned the room, searching for Diesel's old crate, the place labeled dangerous and unadoptable. It was still there, empty now, but the sign was gone. In its place was a new one, bright red, reading, "Patience changes everything." The barn filled as the adoption event began. Kids darted past, parents asked about breeds, volunteers handed out pamphlets. A few news cameras stood near the entrance, their lenses less intimidating this time. Grace and Diesel sat together on a bench, watching people stop and point. "That's Diesel," someone whispered. "That's the rescue dog, the hero." But not everyone looked convinced. Grace noticed a group of older men eyeing Diesel warily, muttering to each other. An anxious woman steered her son away from Diesel's path. Some things, she realized, were slower to change than others. Finally, Donna took the microphone. Thank you for coming, everyone. Today, we have a very special guest. You might have seen them on the news. Grace Whitaker and her dog Diesel. The barn quieted, attention settling on the pair. Grace's throat tightened, but Diesel nudged her knee, grounding her. Donna handed her the mic. For a moment, all Grace heard was her heartbeat and Diesel's soft breathing. She stood, knees trembling. A few months ago, I came here with my mom. I saw Diesel at the end of the row. His crate said dangerous and unadoptable. People said he was too broken, too scared, that no one could help him. But I saw something else. I saw a dog who was waiting. For patience, for kindness, for a chance. She looked at Diesel, who sat at her side, ears perked, eyes calm. Diesel isn't fixed. He wasn't broken to begin with. He just needed time. We both did. The barn was silent. Even the dogs seemed quiet, as if listening. Grace continued, voice stronger now. Diesel was afraid of everything at first. He hid from Boots and slammed doors. He wouldn't eat if anyone was in the room. Yeah, but I learned to wait. I read to him, left him drawings, let him come to me. Slowly, he started to trust me. He showed me how brave he really was, especially when he found that man in the snowstorm. Diesel didn't save him because he was perfect. He saved him because he cared. She glanced around the barn. Some people wiped at their eyes. Others hugged their kids or bent down to comfort a trembling dog. Grace swallowed, her nerves melting into hope. There are more dogs here who are scared, who just need time. Please, if you can, give them a chance. Patience can change everything. She handed the mic back to Donna, who squeezed her hand, eyes shining. The crowd was quiet. Thoughtful. For a long heartbeat, nobody spoke. Then, a little girl in a yellow coat stepped forward, her cheeks pink with excitement. She pointed at a small black dog trembling in the corner. Mom, can we try with her? I think she's just scared, like Diesel was. A ripple of smiles spread through the crowd. One of the older men who'd looked skeptical earlier raised his hand. How do you start? He called. What if they're too afraid? Grace found herself answering, her voice steady now. You start slow, sit near them, let them hear your voice, let them come to you. It takes time, but it's worth it. Donna knelt, hugging Grace tight. You did it, honey. You really did. After the speeches, families approached Grace and Diesel, asking questions, showing off photos of their own rescued pets. Diesel sniffed each outstretched hand, tail wagging in cautious circles. Some children, nervous at first, found courage to kneel beside him, whispering their own stories of being scared or left out. Diesel listened, silent and solid, the way only a dog can. Before leaving, Grace and Renee walked to Diesel's old crate. Grace pressed her palm to the wood, memory flashing back. How lonely he'd looked. How sure she'd been. Renee knelt beside her. You gave him a new life. And maybe a few more today. On the way out, a woman with tears in her eyes stopped them. Thank you for your words, Grace. I think I needed to hear them as much as the dogs did. Outside, Grace exhaled, shoulders light. Diesel hopped into the car, tail wagging, finally at peace in his own fur. As they drove home, Renee squeezed her hand. I'm so proud of you, honey. Grace looked out the window, watching the barn fade into the snowy distance. I'm proud of Diesel. He did the hard part. No, Renee smiled, glancing at her daughter in the mirror. You did it together. Back home, as dusk fell and Diesel napped at her feet, Grace added another sketch to the fridge. A row of dogs, each with a person by their side, hope shining in every pair of eyes. Above them she wrote, Patience changes everything. And for the first time, she truly believed it. The warmth in the Whitaker home, after their return from the barn, was different. Richer, fuller, as if something new had taken root and started to bloom. The sketches on the fridge grew in number, a gallery of Diesel's milestones. and Grace noticed how her mom now smiled more easily, her voice softer, lighter in the evenings. Diesel, too, was at peace, no longer flinching at every noise, but instead moving with the confidence of someone who finally belonged. Word of Diesel's transformation spread beyond Bozeman. The news segment had been picked up by a regional channel. Messages trickled in, letters from townsfolk, emails from strangers, thank yous from other families who'd adopted hard-to-place pets and found hope in Grace's story. Even the local school invited Grace to share her drawings and talk about Diesel in front of her classmates. The shy girl who once avoided the spotlight now stood in front of her peers, Diesel at her side, sharing the story of patience, trust, and second chances. But it wasn't just the distant ripples that mattered. One snowy afternoon, as Grace sat at the kitchen table sketching Diesel lying by the fire, a car pulled up the long, winding drive. The tires crunched through the slush, headlights glowing in the fading light. Grace peeked out the window. A family was stepping out, a man and woman, their daughter bundled in a green puffer coat, a hat pulled low over her eyes. Renee answered the door, warmth in her greeting. "Can I help you?" The woman hesitated, clutching her daughter's hand. "We're the O'Malleys. We saw the story about Diesel. Our daughter Olivia, she's been struggling since we moved here. She's quiet. She doesn't fit in at school. We thought maybe if she met Diesel, maybe it would help." Grace's heart leapt with a kind of knowing, one only someone who's been there can understand. She nodded, inviting them in, careful not to rush. Diesel sat by the fireplace, watching with curious, gentle eyes. Olivia hovered behind her mother, eyes downcast, hand twisting in her coat. Grace knelt by Diesel, patting the rug beside her. "Would you like to sit with us?" Olivia hesitated, then slowly shuffled over, settling cross-legged a safe distance from Diesel. She didn't speak, her gaze fixed on the flames, shoulders tight as if bracing for disappointment. Grace remembered her own first days with Diesel, how words had felt too big, how silence was safer. Diesel didn't move toward Olivia. He simply shifted a little closer to Grace, then rested his head on his paws, watching the new girl with the same patient calm he'd shown Grace those first weeks. Olivia peeked at him just for a second, then looked away. The silence felt heavy, but not uncomfortable. More like a waiting, a gentle offer that didn't need to be rushed. Renee and the O'Malleys retreated to the kitchen, giving the girls their space. Grace took out her sketchbook, flipping to a clean page, and began to draw. "Sometimes," she said softly, "it's easier to talk with pictures." She sketched Diesel lying by the fire, then passed the book and a pencil to Olivia. For a long moment, Olivia didn't move. Then, quietly, she added herself beside Diesel in the drawing, a stick figure with a big hat and small smile. She slid the book back, glancing shyly at Grace. "That's a good drawing," Grace whispered. "Would you like to pet him?" Olivia bit her lip, looking at Diesel, then at Grace for reassurance. Grace nodded, setting an example by gently running her hand along Diesel's side. Olivia reached out, hand trembling, and touched Diesel's fur. Diesel looked up at her, then, sensing her nervousness, laid his head on her lap, a simple, wordless gesture of trust. Olivia's face changed, a hint of wonder, her shoulders relaxing for the first time. She stroked Diesel's fur, tentative at first, then more confident. The two sat in silence, communicating in a language of small movements and soft breaths. "He doesn't think I'm weird," Olivia said, voice almost too soft to hear. Grace smiled, understanding in every fiber of her being. "Me neither." The minutes passed, the house filled with the quiet sounds of contentment, the crackle of the fire, the hum of voices in the kitchen, a Diesel's deep, even breathing. Olivia's parents peeked in, tears in the mother's eyes, when she saw her daughter finally at ease, finally connecting. Renee made hot chocolate for everyone. Olivia sipped hers beside Diesel, growing bolder, telling Grace, haltingly at first, about the move, the loneliness, the longing for a friend who didn't need her to say the right things all the time. Grace listened, her heart aching with empathy. She shared her own story, of being quiet, of finding Diesel when she needed him most, of how sometimes it takes just one friend to make a world feel safe. As the afternoon faded into evening, Olivia helped Grace hang her drawing on the fridge, right beside all the others. This one showed two girls and a big, calm dog in front of a glowing fire. Above it, Olivia wrote, "New friends." Before leaving, Olivia knelt and hugged Diesel tight. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes shining. As the O'Malleys left, Olivia looked back at Grace. "Can I come visit again?" "Anytime," Grace promised, and she meant it. That night, Diesel curled up at Grace's feet as she finished a letter to the shelter, telling them about Olivia and the quiet magic that had unfolded in their living room. She understood now that their story wasn't just about rescue, but about the chain of kindness, patience, and understanding that kept reaching further and further, out of the barn, through the town, into the hearts of people who needed it most. And as she drifted off to sleep, Grace knew the world might still be noisy, and people might still misunderstand, but somewhere out there, a quiet girl and a once unadoptable dog had found a way to make each other, and others, feel a little less alone. The snow outside the cabin had begun to recede, the world softening as spring's first hints crept into the Montana hills. For Grace and Diesel, the changing seasons felt like a gentle reward, a sign that their journey had been more than just surviving winter. It had been about growing, about letting hope in, about choosing each other every single day. Diesel spent more time on the porch now, stretched out in the patch of sunlight that warmed the wooden steps. His eyes were calmer, wiser, always watching for Grace, but never in fear. Sometimes he'd thump his tail just to remind her he was there. Grace loved to draw him like this, at peace, strong and calm, the dog who'd once been nothing but a warning sign to everyone else. On one such morning, Grace sat beside Diesel, sketchbook balanced on her knees. She drew quietly, capturing the angle of his ears, the gentle slope of his back, the confidence in his gaze as he watched the wind moving through the trees. Diesel glanced at her every so often, as if checking to make sure she was still there, that everything was all right. They didn't need words. Their comfort was in the silence, in the gentle companionship that only comes from true trust. The cabin, once filled with anxious whispers and unspoken fears, was now alive with laughter, with visitors who brought their own quiet stories. Renee, once so cautious, had begun to host small gatherings. Neighbors, new friends, families who'd heard about Diesel, and wanted to meet the dog who'd taught them all something about patience. Diesel greeted each guest with calm curiosity, sniffing hands, wagging his tail. The children adored him, and even the adults, those who'd once eyed him with suspicion, couldn't help but smile when he rested his head on their knee or followed Grace with unshakable loyalty. But the quiet moments remained Grace's favorite. She loved to watch Diesel sleep on the porch, his chest rising and falling in time with the steady pulse of the earth. Sometimes, as dusk settled, Grace would sit nearby, sketching the two of them, side by side, their shadows long against the porch boards. In those moments, she felt like they were the only two people in the world who truly understood each other. One evening, after a day of gentle rain and fresh greens sprouting in the woods, Grace sat on the steps with Diesel as the sun began to set. The sky blushed with pink and orange, the world humming with the quiet music of frogs and birds. Grace's sketchbook was open in her lap, but she'd stopped drawing, just watching. Just being. Renee stepped out with mugs of warm cocoa. She handed one to Grace and then ruffled Diesel's fur. "You two make quite the team," she said with a smile, sitting beside them. "I'm not sure who saved whom." Grace grinned, remembering everything, the first day at the barn, the slow progress, the setbacks and breakthroughs, the way Diesel had transformed not just himself, but her and her mother too. She leaned her head on Renee's shoulder. "I think we saved each other." Diesel gave a soft huff, as if agreeing, then rolled onto his side, legs twitching in a dream. As night crept in, Grace found herself thinking about all the moments that had brought them here, the way Diesel had learned to trust her, the way she'd learned to speak up for him, the lives they touched together. Olivia, the rescued man, the families at the barn. It was more than she'd ever imagined possible. That night, before bed, Grace added one last sketch to the fridge. It showed Diesel sitting tall beside her, both of them looking out over the woods, strong and peaceful. Above them, in careful lettering, she wrote, "Some dogs bark loud. Others just wait until someone chooses them." Anyway, she stared at the picture for a long time, tears prickling in her eyes, not from sadness, but from a kind of full-hearted gratitude that made her chest ache in the best way. Later, as she lay in bed, Diesel sprawled at her feet, Grace thought of the voiceover she'd heard in movies, the words that wrapped everything up with meaning. She whispered into the quiet room, knowing Diesel would hear her, even if he was already dreaming. Not everyone gets chosen right away. Some of us wait in the shadows, hoping. Sometimes it just takes one person to see us, to wait, to believe. That's what changes everything. And sometimes when you choose each other, you find out you were never broken at all. You just needed time to grow. In the days that followed, Grace and Diesel settled into their new routine, a life marked by simple joys and deep understanding. Diesel ran freely in the meadow, chased butterflies, then always returned to Grace, no longer afraid of the world or his place in it. Grace sketched every moment, her drawings growing more confident, more full of life. The O'Malleys visited often, Olivia always making a beeline for Diesel. Other kids from town joined in, their laughter echoing through the trees. Grace watched as Diesel welcomed each visitor, never rushing, always offering gentle acceptance. With every new friend, every gentle touch, the legend of Diesel, the unadoptable dog, grew a little brighter. The shelter called to say that more families were adopting the dogs who'd once been overlooked. Donna, the kind volunteer, sent photos of happy dogs with their new people, each one a testament to the change that patience and hope could bring. On the anniversary of the day Grace chose Diesel, they celebrated with a picnic on the porch. Renee baked a cake. Diesel got his own pup cake. And the house was filled with friends and laughter. That night, as the stars scattered across the sky, Grace whispered a thank you to the universe, for Diesel, for her mom, for second chances. She knew life would always have storms, days of fear, setbacks, doubts. But now, she understood that storms pass, and trust can grow, even in the harshest winters. With Diesel at her side, Grace felt ready for anything. Together, they had found a place where no one was unlovable, where time and kindness could heal the deepest wounds. And as Diesel drifted off to sleep, dreaming of sunlit meadows and soft hands, Grace promised herself she would always choose patience, always choose hope. Because sometimes the greatest stories begin with the ones nobody else wanted and end with the quiet, extraordinary love between a girl and her dog. Underscore, 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 underscore. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like and follow our channel for more inspiring tales about second chances, hope, and the quiet heroes who change our lives.